Largest warehouse clearance is taking place now at all Future Shop locations. Buy now with confidence, knowing that your purchase is the guaranteed lowest price in BC.
The Future Shop, Vancouver, Richmond, and now in Coquitlam, Pine Tree Village, Barnett, and Lougheed.
Clients love the results at Weight Loss Clinic.
I took a size 16 to an 18 before, now I take a size 7.
It's the best thing that ever happened to me. I can slip into a 7 or a 9.
I tried other programs, but this is the only one that worked for me.
Is weight loss your New Year's resolution? Weight Loss Clinic can make it happen. Now you can save 50% on every introductory program. Call now for your private consultation. Mention TV and get a special bonus.
BCTV, we're giving it all we got.
Good morning. It is said of this fellow Webster that he comes in at 9 a.m. precisely and finds a molehill, and by 10:30 precisely he must have built it into a mountain. Well, there is a mountain that's facing the Hope Harcourt Coalition in the city of Vancouver. They are so short-sighted it's almost hard to credit. It's a very simple proposition. BC Place is here to stay. The stadium was built on time and on target. The stadium costs are going to be recovered from the revenues from the stadium and from BC Place. What's happening now you wouldn't believe. Just before Christmas, Jimmy Patterson came out blunt and flat-footed and said, if we get messed around anymore by that mob up at the City Hall, my words, not his, we'll close down BC Place. Now, it could be pressure, it could just be, you know, the old hammer on City Council, but I think Patterson is entitled to use that hammer. Let me try and explain it very, very simply. Up to now, about $257 million has been poured into BC Place, and you and I are paying for it. Don't kid yourself. You get nothing for nothing from any government, social credit, or the Libs in Ottawa. Now, they want to spend, and they want to build a big hotel down on the Granville slopes. And with an apartment block behind it, and the curbs and the roads and the waterfront and the rest, it's $130 million that's going to be spent in Vancouver, starting as soon as the City Council makes up its confused mind and stops listening to all the planners in that giant department of Vancouver City Hall. And Patterson says, look, we can't put up a hotel, and we've got the people to put it up, unless you give us enough room in the hotel to pay off the bank loans. City Council says, you can't build a hotel there unless it's only 150 feet high and has 700,000 square feet. Patterson says, name of goodness, so what's to that effect? You can't get your money back at a 150-foot high hotel. He's come down from 300 to about 250 feet. They still say, oh no, you can't build a hotel because it will block the view from Bridges. Bridges Restaurant, look across it, and the planners say, it'll cover some of the sky. Just to the left of it is the West End, which is the most ill-conceived, badly planned, dense development with buildings that go up to 350 feet, and at the top of Granville Street, buildings that are 600 feet into the sky above sea level. So on Thursday night, Rankin and the boys and nice Nellie Harcourt, who can't make up his mind whether he's made up his mind he doesn't want to be premier, but he is going to be mayor again. Well, if they don't show some sanity in giving the developers at BC Place a chance to break even, Patterson will close the place down. So all you unemployed out there, construction men, unionized construction men especially, remember that if BC Place closes down, it's not because they don't want to make a buck, they've got to make a buck. It's because nice Nellie Harcourt And some of these other magnificent brains on City Council have decided to just dump on BC Place. They can't even make up their mind to build a bridge. We're going to get half a bridge. In what other city in the world would they be messing around with a plebiscite saying, we want the voters' authority to build the other half of the bridge? I'm telling you, if you saw the City Council on television full time, you wouldn't believe it. It's better than General Hospital when it comes to a soap opera. Thursday night is the final hearing. City Council will make its decision, and if they make the wrong decision, then they close down BC Place. You can get Harry and the boys to help you survive through a very tough year. Now, on the program this morning, we've got two, don't start the, oh yes, we've got two items. We've got a two-course meal for you. The last salmon in British Columbia when it's caught very shortly in our waters, and the possibility of tainted meat. So we have a two-course meal of scarce salmon and meat. The guy I'm going to talk to about the salmon, you know, I'm sick and tired of this. I'm one of the millions of people who don't understand the double talk from the fishermen who, given a free hand, would clean out the entire waters on the coast tomorrow and then go to the bank and borrow more money and build a bigger ship which will catch fewer fish next year. There's the fishermen, there's the union fishermen, there's the big packing companies, and there's the federal government. Mr. de Bane is the Minister of Fisheries, and we are honored indeed to have here this morning a man who may be able to cut through all the balderdash. I doubt it, but we'll try him. His name is Terence O'Reilly, and he is the Senior Policy Advisor to Mr. de Bane, whom we can't get on the program yet, so we've got to settle for second best. Please accept my apologies for that, but you're not the minister. Now, you remember last week we had Fred Coates of the PSAC on, Public Service Alliance of Canada, giving us dire warnings. Due to the cutback in the frequency of inspection, we might go into a store and buy something which is tainted. Just to remind you what Coates said, here is a little clip of one of his main points.
Historically, the federal meat inspection stamps, legends, labels have been under the very strict control of our federal meat inspectors. They're locked up every night in a cabinet, and then they are given out to the plant personnel to operate with during the day, but definitely under the very close supervision of the inspectors. Now, under this new FOIL program they're attempting to implement, these stamps will be taken away from the inspectors and given to the plant personnel to use whatever way they wish.
To give us Eugene Whelan's side of the program, we have with us today Dr. Ross Marra, who is the Regional Veterinary Director in British Columbia. But first, Terry O'Reilly, after the break. We all went through, those of us interested, the Jack Davis buyback plan for the excessive capacity of our fishing fleet. We all went through the Pierce report with its fancy plans for royalties collected and buybacks of surplus boats. Well, while the minister is very busy on the East Coast shoveling hundreds of millions of dollars into the East Coast fishery, the West Coast is in its usual state of utter confusion. We are reliably informed that the future for salmon is a disaster and that the present is pretty bad too. And the one thing that the government seems to be looking at is a Pierce recommendation for a buyback of the surplus boats to bail out the banks, perhaps. Terry O'Reilly, can you please, in words of one syllable, for we nits on the West Coast, just spell out what, if anything, the minister is going to do to get rid of all these fancy big boats, mortgaged to the hilt, that are raping our salmon stocks without let or hindrance except for fisheries time control?
Well, I won't stick to a single syllable. I think the first thing I want to say, and I watched your program with Dr. Pierce, you called me a chicken. I want to show that the chicken is here.
You're not chicken.
The chicken is here, and you spoke about meat today. The chicken is here, and I would like to say, I guess, first of all, that it's a lot safer to be a chicken on this coast than to be a fish.
Oh, wait till you hear about meat inspection.
As to the confusion and the future, you mentioned, first of all, the future of the fish is bad. I beg to differ. I think there's reason for hope, and I believe that you have a Minister of Fisheries and Oceans who, at the bottom line of it all, will ensure that measures are taken to bring about the rebuilding of the stocks. Now, the effects of that are perhaps a different thing, and now you get into the proposal by Dr. Pierce for a buyback.
Well, before you begin to confuse me with your Ottawa bureaucraties, you know, and talk around in circles, let me put some simple propositions to you. Do you mind?
Not at all.
The banks hold mortgages on boats in British Columbia of about $250 million.
That's pretty close, I think.
And that already normally they would have closed in on the fisheries fleet and seized the boats and got the license for themselves for resale.
Yes.
Are you going to, if there is a buyback program, it's quite clear therefore that what we're doing are bailing out the geniuses who gave us the dome losses, the vast inflation, the increased charges. Any buyback program, will it bail out the banks?
I fear that there is no way of having a buyback program which will not focus a lot of money at the banks, and that is, in fact, one of the concerns.
Focus? What do you mean focus? You mean say it's $100 million. By the way, how much does it cost to administer what is called the DFO in the Pacific region, Fisheries and Oceans? How much?
The Pacific region budget is in the area of $100 million annually.
$100 million? That's all we want for a buyback.
I don't know if that is all you want for a buyback, Jack.
How much would we? All right, $100 million for administration. That's incredible.
This includes, however, the Salmonid Enhancement Program and the Ocean Sciences branch.
All right.
Research.
We've got roughly 4,000 fishing boats on the coast, correct?
4,500. maybe?
4,500. If you were to make it efficient tomorrow, how many would have to go?
Dr. Pierce suggested 50%, and I wouldn't want to say a specific percentage. I think that the amount that has to go should be dependent upon the design of the fishery which remains. That's my view of it.
All right. If we have to buy out 50% of the fleet, and we forget, that the banks would get great benefit, but how many boats would be bought out? About 2,000 odd.
Yeah.
Is that in any way a possibility now?
I think it is. I think it depends on the degree of voluntariness, and the degree of voluntariness is going to be to a large extent dependent upon how the fishery is going to be conducted following any such program. But I want to make something clear, Jack. There is no, at the moment, there is no buyback program, right?
Nothing.
There is not a buyback program. It has been recognized that it is essential that the fleet be reduced.
Is there any program?
Oh, yes.
What is the program?
Well, it's impossible to finalize without consultation with the industry. They've asked for consultation, and I think this has been one of the tremendous accomplishments that Pierre de Bane has had as Minister of Fisheries and Oceans, is the extent to which the industry has been brought along to deal with its problems and focus on them, and the opportunity created there. But, final measures won't be decided without consultation with them, and we do have some pretty good pictures of what's needed in the management regime in the fishery following the correction.
To use bureaucraties, what is the time phrase for your final decision on anything?
I would say we're looking at early March.
Early March. Terry O'Reilly, Special Policy Advisor to the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans, says they will have a firm plan, he believes, a matter of within 6 or 7 weeks.
I believe so.
Now, if there is a buyback program, will we be buying back those fishermen who have a big year, make a lot of money, go out, borrow more money, and have a big boat which is a mortgage to the hilt? Why do the fishermen do this? Why do they do it? You know as well as I do the pattern in BC is a small boat, big year, borrow, because you know why they do it? Because when they borrow for a new boat or a bigger boat, they don't pay any taxes, income taxes on their income the year before, right?
Well, I think that when they have a big year and they put the yield back into their vessels, yes, they can avoid paying taxes in the single year, or large taxes on that income.
Right.
And then they have had accelerated capital cost allowances, which have, there's no question that's influenced.
Oh, sure. Then your fisheries people come along next year and say you can only fish 4 hours a week or 1 day a week, and they can't get enough fish to make the mortgage payments, right?
Yeah. Now, I think, you know, Jack, it's important if we understand the basic principles of this whole restructuring process. First of all, the only way to halt the decline in the resource is to reduce the annual allowable catch, all right, until the stocks are rebuilt. Now, that's distinct and separate from a buyback program or a fleet reduction or whatever. That's management. That's a case of reduce the catch.
Right.
Now, a fleet buyback of itself will not halt the decline in the salmon stocks.
So you
and
must.
so let's make a distinction.
But it
on
will
those things.
with fewer ships facing fewer salmon.
True, but theoretically, the restriction placed on fishing is what is required to halt decline in stock. When you talk about a buyback program or a fleet reduction, you're talking about the economic issues within the commercial fishing sector. And that, by the way, is to a large extent distinct and separate. Now, there is an interrelationship in the sense that, you know, to manage the resource in a way that will result in rebuilding is going to be somewhat simplified, more manageable, without the pressure of an excessive number of fishermen saying, we need fish to make a living. But they are separate and distinct issues, in my judgment, except for that latter factor. If a fleet reduction program is introduced, the size and scale of it must exceed the extent to which the catch must be cut in order to reverse the decline in the stocks, or you've done nothing for the economy of the fishery.
Right.
So those are the fundamental principles.
Good.
Right?
I understand that, but the only thing I understand up to now is that you will have some kind of program within 6 weeks.
And that program will involve a changed management regime, regulatory regime. It should involve and will involve fleet reduction, whether by buyback or by other measures.
Right.
And I don't think other measures should be ruled out, because buyback is not the only answer. And it will involve specific targets for the rebuilding. And Jack, you know Pierre de Bane. He's been on your program. You've met him. You've talked
Call
to
him
him.
Tony Curtis.
The Tony Curtis of Cabinet is what you
Okay,
said.
more with the Special Policy Advisor to Pierre de Bane, the Tony Curtis of the Cabinet, after the break. Terry O'Reilly, Special Policy Advisor to the Minister, and I was told by a listener the other day that I'm far too brusque with Easterners, but I just can't help it. It's what we call on the West Coast alienation. You know?
Alienation.
However, you at least have come out here and put your head in a sling. Now, the present dividing of the pie is what? 18% of the Indians about, correct?
No, sir. The best data we have, are you talking in the commercial sector?
Yes, yes, of course.
About 17, 18, yeah.
Yeah, correct. So 82% goes to the others.
Yes.
There are a number of non-Indian fishermen who are very concerned about the speech made by your minister to Native Brotherhood in Alberni on November 25. You remember that speech?
Yes, sir.
In which he said, fish is a springboard to Indian economic development. A major vehicle will be land claims. However, he intends to use other things, and the allocation of salmon catch quotas to a band could achieve the same ends. What are you going to do to disabuse the fears of non-Indian fishermen that you're going to... As a matter of fact, one of the Indian spokesmen, a very good one, I think it was Rivard, Newman, said, hey, we want to reverse it. 18% non-Indian fishermen and 82% the Indians. And then with all this ridiculous caper last year with television coverage of the food fishery arrests, and that collapsed in a big thing. So I want you to tell me about the quotas, what you're going to do for Indian bands, which will help the commercial and the sport fishermen, and what you're going to do about the food fishery. How much do they take in food fishery?
Approximately 4%
Is that,
of
what,
the total
is that
take.
what it's supposed to be taken?
There's, in terms of what is supposed to be taken,
There's no limit.
the great difficulty is that there's not a nominal control.
I see.
There's not a numerical
So
control.
after all these charges collapsed in the valley and whatnot, that's a problem that you're now going to ignore altogether. Is it?
Not at all.
Oh, you're not going to enforce it like you attempted the last time.
No, I think that this is a really badly understood issue, Jack, and it's worth getting into just a little bit.
I understand it perfectly clearly. The allegation is that the food fishery stuff is used for bootlegging fish in large quantities.
That is the allegation.
That's the allegation.
That's the allegation.
Charges were all thrown out in court for various reasons.
However, the best information is that collectively, whether used for food or for whatever purposes, collectively, out of what is called the food fishery, the utilization of the food fishery right, as it were, is taking about 4%.
And that's okay.
Well, whether it's okay or not, I suppose, is subjective. But the point is that under the present circumstances, there is no real way of controlling that.
Agreed.
And frankly, the government, once fish are dead, should not be overly concerned with how they're used.
And that affects the spawning runs.
I think the concern in the commercial fishing sector is that the commercialization of the food fishery may hurt their business or result in the taking of more fish. I would suggest that initially, while the stocks remain in a state of decline, that without enormous increases in the take of fish, that the commercialization made legal provides a tremendous boost economically to native people, in the sense that if there are fish being sold illegally on a black market or bootleg, as you use the term, to make that a legal process will triple the revenue that comes from it, at least.
Yeah.
Moreover, in the sense of where that impacts on the commercial sector, if fish are being sold bootleg at ridiculously low prices, that's having an impact on dragging down their prices. So the trade-off, I think, would be along the lines of commercialization, so long as there is a management tool put in there to have numerical control.
In other words, clean it up.
So that you can ensure that the escapements still get to the spawning ground.
Clean it up and legalize it.
Yes.
Now that sounds sane. Where do the sports fishermen come into this? Are they screaming these days at you? Everybody else is.
Yes, they are. Every sector of the fishery has been screaming at me, and that's fair ball. They're all concerned. The sports fishery, I think, is a sector which has been, and I even refer back to Dr. Pierce, one which has been largely ignored. Mm-hmm. Its value in British Columbia is tremendous, and it's an area in which growth can be promoted, whereas in the commercial sector, at least in the near term, it's on a decline.
Now, you can't tell me about the buyback, any details, but the fact is that we, the public, will pay for the buyback one way or another, that's for sure, either through a royalty on the fish, which will be passed back to us, or straight handouts from the federal government, which will come from our taxes, right? One way or the other.
One way or the other, the economy has to pay for a buyback if there's a buyback.
You know, there are a number of free enterprisers in this province who would say, if a fisherman goes broke, let him go broke. It was his fault. He went into the business. It's a hazardous business. And if his boat is seized, the government should keep the license. But there's a wrinkle in that, isn't there? Because of the banks. What's the wrinkle with the banks?
Well, the wrinkle is that, and it doesn't matter whether you do it on a basis of seizure or not on seizure, because if a bank looks at something as a collateral, then it is looking at that collateral in the context of its value if a seizure is necessary.
In other words, it's not just the boat, it's the boat and the license and the personal guarantee of his house and his wife and kids.
Well, exactly, because the boat is not probably very
So therefore,
saleable.
when a bank seizes the beat-up old boat or the new boat, it also gets the license.
Except
because that's part of its collateral, the value of the license.
Yes, but it won't take the license into its own ownership. What it will do is the license will become a part of the disposition of the seized asset. In
In
other
other
words, to
words,
sell to
it's-
someone else,
It sells the boat and the
and,
license.
and the license goes with it.
You'll probably have to finish up buying the licenses in future if there is a buyback program from the banks, and that'll make you very popular.
This is one of the principal concerns, and my own personal view is that if the banks are not prepared to do some bleeding in the process so that any program does in fact help fishermen, then I guess my own personal view is I would advocate measures that would reduce the fleet that don't involve a buyback.
Yeah, that's a possibility. Or you could lean on the banks. God knows their track record is pretty bad anyway, and say, okay, when you take it back, we'll take back the license from you.
But Jack, I think we can't underestimate the banks. They've done a technical analysis, I assume, of the situation, but they've also done a strategic analysis of the situation.
Oh, in other words, they're looking at their PR.
Well, I think that they know very well that we're in this situation where we have, as you said, too many boats chasing too few fish. We need boats out of the water, and as long as we're prepared to transfer licenses when they seize boats, they know that that will not achieve the objectives of government.
We've learned a couple of things. We haven't touched about the lack of a treaty with the Yanks. We might just have to go our own way arbitrarily on the coast and say, okay, we'll look after our fish, we'll stop you fishing in the Johnstone Straits, and we'll take what we want within reason. Hey, that'll come to that, won't it?
Well, I guess my own position is that we should serve notice for ending the convention in the Gulf, and if that doesn't result in ratification of the treaty, then we should fish our fish, and the people in Oregon and Washington should talk to their brothers in Alaska to clean up their act.
Good stuff, Terry O'Reilly. Now, I want to talk to fishermen, especially fishermen who want to hammer De Bane or Terry O'Reilly after the break. Terry O'Reilly, Special Policy Advisor to De Bane, Fisheries Minister. Go ahead from Cortes Island.
Yes, sir. Yeah, first of all, I'd just like to say I can't stress how important it really is culturally and economically, the Pacific fishery, as we're kicking it about here, and it has been kicked about for such a long time. What I'd like to stress, too, is we're putting $100 million into a buyback here.
No, we're not. Just don't. He hasn't said any such thing. You see, you're all so busy in your cultural aspect, you're not listening.
Okay.
He hasn't got a buyback.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, we have nothing committed here.
Oh, you're a fisherman.
Yes, that's right, sir.
How much did you make last year after depreciation, capital cost allowance, and no income taxes?
I did not even bring home enough to feed my family for the bloody winter, I'll tell you that.
How big
right now.
what kind of fish boat have you got?
I've got a combination gill netter troller, a 35-foot vessel.
How long have you been in the business?
I've been fishing my own boat approximately 7 years.
And if you were bought out, do you owe the bank any money?
I owe fish company money.
And do you want to be bought out?
No, sir. No, I would like to see some kind of changes in this industry while there still is a chance to have some changes.
All right, what do you think of De Bane?
Well, there's...
Or O'Reilly?
O'Reilly, okay. Mr. O'Reilly's there. Okay, now, what I think is that if we, for one, I don't know what kind of moves we've made to get some kind of West Coast minister, somebody who's here on the West Coast.
Yeah, good point.
Looking at this.
We haven't had a West Coast minister since Jack Davis, since before that, the best one we ever had, Jimmy Sinclair.
Well, I suppose I could get very political and say it becomes rather important to elect liberals in British Columbia, but to be nonpartisan about it, the issue of a West Coast fisheries minister is a non-issue. You could not expect or want more passion or concern for the West Coast fishery than Pierre de Bane has.
Oh, tell him we love him. Go ahead from Powell River.
Good morning, Jack. Just something for Mr. O'Reilly again.
I want questions, not culture.
He's referring to that buyback program for a fleet reduction, and I wonder if the fleet isn't already substantially reduced by the boats that the banks they've already seized, or that the boats will have to seize because they made, a poor judgment. They're investing in these boats, and with the poor fishing future, people aren't going to buy those boats back. So if all this takes place, any monies that might presumably be allotted for buyback could go straight to improving the fish stocks, like through the SEP.
All right, let's ask a question. Do you have any data at all, Terry, on the number of boats seized or about to be seized? Of course, the banks are sitting on the fence now waiting to see if there's any public money in the trough for them.
Absolutely, and let's understand that. That indeed is at the crux of the dilemma. You talk about seizures of vessels. I've had a great many fishermen in my office who in fact have told me that they've been into their bank and thrown the keys to their boat across the desk, and the banker has thrown the keys back and said, no thanks. The assumption, because of this dilemma, that when a boat is taken out, that it's going to be sold to someone else along with a license, and therefore that fishing pressure will remain in the fishery. This dilemma results in the fact that the bank sits back, well aware of that, assuming sooner or later government has to address this problem. Therefore we sit, and in the meantime we're not going to pull too many more vessels out or seize them, because as soon as we do, and as soon as it's known that a vessel is seized, it's stripped on the dock. As long as it is held by the fishermen, they have a custodian and they don't pay him a salary.
Right.
No, that's a very good point. The banks won't take it because they're sitting there with their big sweaty hands out waiting for a handout from the government, right?
They know the dilemma, yes. I assume they've done a strategic analysis.
Ed Newman, President of the Native Brotherhood. Did we phone you or did you phone us?
You phoned me.
Have you been watching Terry O'Reilly?
Yes, I have.
What have you got to say to this man?
Yeah, well, I agree with Mr. O'Reilly, what he said about that the buyback program will not solve the problems of the industry. The Department of Fisheries will still be in place, and they are the problem. They are lousy managers.
That's fair enough. Your television is up, Mr. Newman. It's not. Something else is going.
Mine's down. I can't hear it.
Good. Carry on. The lousy managers are 100 million a year on the Pacific region.
Yeah, that's right. The white man has had control of this fishery now ever since they came here. And they've done a lousy job. The resources declining.
Could the Indian fishermen do any better a job?
Well, it was better before you guys came.
I know, but that's a simple way to say about it. We weren't here, there was no problem. You had fish coming out your ears then.
That's right. And, you can't just blame the fishing fleet for the decline. You have poor logging practices, and the pollution of the river systems have had a lot to do with it. The development of such as Kimano 2 have wiped out salmon runs, and yet the people of Canada close their eyes to those kinds of developments.
Then what are we going to do now, Mr. Newman? What's your recommendation to O'Reilly? I mean, there's no point in complaining now about the Kimano run or the pollution.
Right. The only way a buyback program is not going to do anything for Indian people. The only thing that's going to improve things for the Indian people is the settlement of land claims and the settlement of sea claims. And those things have to happen before there's any stability in the fishing industry.
All right, what are your sea claims? Well, you must have been pleased with what de Bane said in Port Alberni in November.
Yeah, well, we've heard those things from the government before.
No, but you don't believe them?
No.
Right.
I'd have to see it first. The white people are organizing all kinds of committees to go to Ottawa to lobby against the Indian people.
Well, they're lobbying for themselves, too, of course. Don't forget, they're up the creek.
Those things were instigated by what the minister said about Indian people. That didn't happen before while the Sioux was on the other foot. Well, things were unfair with Indian people, it was okay. Now, all of a sudden, there's a threat to the white people. They've got to start developing those kinds of committees.
Well,
Indian people.
You can't blame them for fighting back,
That's right. I can tell you how it feels to feel that way, because I've gone through it. I was pushed out of the industry.
Good. No, I don't mean good.
If you want to know how it feels to be pushed out, just ask the Indian people. They'll tell you.
Terry?
Ed makes some good points. I think...
you're going to lose a lot of votes if you overbalance it to the Indian side and take quotas away from the white
We've already lost a lot of votes. Since 1927, we've gone down to 15% of the fleet.
Yes, let's be fair. If we want to talk about equality, and this is
I'm not talking about equality. I'm talking pragmatic.
What Ed's referring to is that there's a lot of discussion in the industry about equality. The participation of Indian people in the fishery in British Columbia has dropped by about 50% in a 10-year period. That is, in my judgment, and I think in the minister's judgment, unacceptable. And whatever kind of fleet reduction program there's going to be, I have no qualms in saying that the minister himself takes the position that whatever takes place in fleet reduction should not have an adverse effect on native
You're
participation
telling,
in that
I
fishery.
want to get to the white fishermen. You're telling the white fishermen that fleet reduction will affect them only and not the Indian fishing fleet.
No, I don't think you can prevent it from affecting the Indian
But that's
fishing
your
fleet,
policy.
but minimize the effect.
Yeah, well, he's on your side, Mr. Newman.
Yeah, well, I hope so.
Well, you know, but you can't tell with these
We
politics.
need all the help we can get with the organization that's been developed against Indian people.
And you leave me with one message. You say the Pacific Fisheries Department of the government is a disaster.
That's right. That's right. And it's been a disaster for a long time.
Thanks, Ed, and much obliged. We'll now talk to we'll talk to other fishermen, Indian and non-Indian, after the break. Go ahead to De Bane's Special Policy Advisor. That's you. Where are you?
I'm here.
Speak up.
Okay. I'm an original bee fisherman, one of those who was legislated into the bee category in 1968.
On a buyback?
No, not on the buyback at all. This was just straight arbitrary legislation. We had no say in the matter. What provision is being made by this new licensing committee to protect the historical rights of this small group of original bee fishermen that are now left? Originally, there were 1,064 of us, and now we're down to 73.
Well, I think we should straighten out the facts a little bit. First, I cannot accept the premise that the control was a legislated one. Pierre de Bane's predecessor, Romeo Leblanc, entered into discussions with bee license fishermen, the original bee license fishermen, and target dates were agreed upon as to the termination of those licenses. The termination date came about, further discussions were entered into, and a final extension was agreed upon, and that extension is coming to its conclusion. Now, those were agreements, they were understandings between the bee license fishermen and the minister at the time. And now when we look at this point in time, while one's heart might want to say, let's continue on with an original bee license fisherman, we're talking about a dilemma, a crisis based on excess fishing capacity. There isn't room, and I think there's not a rationale for further extension of the original bee license.
Well, that's clear enough. He says you're dead in the water.
Well, his statement that there had been consideration given to the bee fishermen after consultation with the minister is not correct.
Well, we'll just have to leave it at that for the moment. Go ahead, please. Go ahead.
Mr. Webster?
Yes, sir.
First of all, I would like to point out that I'm by no means a greenhorn or anything else. Our family is a third-generation fisherman, and I personally have 48 years as gillnet trawler.
Right.
Now, what I'd like to point out is, first of all, Mr. Pierce's report, and I'm very surprised at it. Man, with his intelligence, his abilities, and the time spent, is not getting to the problem, but smokescreening. Mr. O'Reilly is doing the same thing all over again.
What do you want done? What do you want done? Simply.
What I want done is this. First of all, if you take your pencil, in 1968, when they instituted license limitation, we had 320 seine boats capable of making 1,600 sets a day.
Right.
Okay. Now we have, and we were supposed to have license limitation. Now we have an excess of 530 seine boats capable during daylight hours making 22 sets, which amounts to 11,660 sets per day.
In other words, it's gone up 10 times almost, certainly 8 times.
But if they open the 24, the seine boats don't honor daylight hours. They fish in a neighborhood of 40 sets a day, which amounts to 21,200 sets.
The point you're making be that...
The point I'm making is this. Both Mr. Pierce and Mr. O'Reilly claim that they're going to cut the fleet in half, take it down by 2,000. What are they going to do? Take off 2,000 seine boats, or are they going to take off the gill nets, which does practically nothing, no damage to the fishery? Okay, if they take off, say 50% of the seine boats, never mind the fleet overall, take 50% of the seine boats, I will cut the seine fleet down to 260 boats. Okay, if those 260 boats fish and make 22 cents, only daylight fishery, it still make 5,720 cents.
Hold it. Your point is very clear. You're saying they're going to cut the fleet, cut the seiners, because this phony license limitation has resulted in a massive increase in bigger and more powerful and more efficient seiners. And if they wipe out half of the seiners, it would leave the little guys like you with the gill net trawlers still in business making a living, right?
Right. That's only part of the problem.
Hold on. That's the only part we're going to take from you. That's very clear. And he's right, is he not?
In some respects, he is. There are three points, I think, come out of that. The first one is an opinion difference. Dr. Peter Pierce conducted an exhaustive study, and the opinion difference is that I think it's the best one that has ever been conducted on the Pacific fishery. I don't agree with
But what about cutting
all
the
the
seiners?
conclusions. Now we go back to, you can talk about yesterday. Pierce addressed what we have to do today. There is no question in my mind that the biggest appetite of any single vessel is the seiner. There is no doubt in my own mind, and I'm speaking personally and not on behalf of the government, that the method of conducting the fishery is out of date, and that there ought to be better utilization of the gill net fleet. The benefits in the context of mixing the economic efficiency factor with the necessity in resource management to selectivity in fishing spells out better utilization of the gill net fleet. I don't think there's any doubt.
In other words, cut the seiner fleet.
I think.
See, you went round that backwards like a politician.
Each group, Jack, each group has to be cut. And I haven't said 50%. I'm not going to say it. Each gear type has to be cut.
I want to finish this. That guy's figures sound right to me. The capacity of the seiners has exploded since 1968. And the little gill netter says, cut back some of these damn seiners, we can still make a living and you will save the harvest. And that's logic.
It is not going to change the fact that you've got to cut the catch now
but if you
to
cut the big
rebuild
boys,
the stocks.
If you cut the big boys, the seiners, there's room for the gill net trawlers.
That's true, but each gear type could say the same thing.
No. The seiners are the ones that take the loads. They're the ones that we'd see in happy years saying, I bought $1 million catch today, you know.
I don't disagree with that, but I would say there is a place for the seiner in the BC fishery. It is an efficient way to catch fish, but it's a case of which sectors
in other
you
words,
cut by
you
how
haven't
much.
made up your mind
That's
yet.
that's not at all true.
I'll have to do one short segment. A couple of more fishermen I want to get on. I'd like to get a seiner if I could after the break. And then I got to go to Dr. Marra. One more. God damn it. For those perceptive listeners, Jack Monroe was not in the studio this morning. It was Jack Webster who slipped. I do apologize. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, forget it. Go ahead, please.
Well, Mr. Webster, it's pretty depressing to see you cheering on Mr. O'Reilly this morning as he talks about cutting back on...
I'm not cheering him on. I'm trying to get some specific answers. Just as a reporter, I've gone through the buyback since 1896. Well, you have at him. Tell him what's wrong with he and his minister.
The problem with him and his minister is that they're concentrating on solving a problem they created over 20 years of liberal rule by eliminating the fishing industry. They're talking about cutting it back 50%. Their own documents talk about 3,000 unemployed and the closing down of coastal communities. And what the industry has been saying unanimously, apparently to deaf ears in Ottawa, is that they should talk as well about creating some more fish through a salmon enhancement program and proper habitat protection. We don't hear anything about that, nor do we hear when this plan of Mr. O'Reilly's is going to bring back some health, whether it'll be 10 years or 20 years or ever. And that's the kind of thing that I think fishermen would like to hear, some promise that someday things are going to turn around or that they'll listen to a little bit of the unanimous opinion of the industry as far as creating more fish is concerned.
Well, apart from the salmon enhancement program and the stopping of logging streams and all the rest of it, what do you want done now?
Well, the treaty could have been settled 10 years ago on principle satisfactory to Canada, but the government surrendered that because they're afraid to infuriate the Americans because of all the other conflicts are in with them. The same is the case with the environmental protection. We just haven't had any. The AMAX case is a classic. And for Mr. O'Reilly to say that his minister has been a pioneer in developing consultation with the industry is a joke, because the Minister's Advisory Council has unanimously advised a SEP program and a habitat protection program, which the minister's ignored. And it's also proposed a fleet rationalization scheme, which Mr. O'Reilly said was too weak. It was only proposing a 20% reduction in the...
Okay, come on.
All right, first of all, I'm gonna say, when the minister sent me out here to try to deal with this fishery, I promised the industry some directness, and I'm gonna pull a page out of Webster's book, and I'm gonna say 3/4 of what you said is crap. First of all, the production of additional fish is not a solution. The rehabilitation of natural stocks is essential, and in terms of listening or not listening to the industry, I've been sitting in those MAC Council meetings, and we have been listening, and the minister has been listening. I didn't use the term pioneer. I said he's done more to bring along the process of them working together as an industry, and I stand by that. Pierre de Bane has done more to permit and foster the working together of the different sectors of this industry than any Minister of Fisheries and Oceans up till now. In terms of production of additional fish, let's look at that realistically. Thus far, that has been part of the problem. You produce artificially multi-tons of fish, you throw them out there in the ocean and you say, okay, now they're there, we can increase the fishing effort that goes on against those fish, and what happens is that everybody forgot that you can't train fish not to swim with each other. So you attack those fish en masse, and you take out the artificially produced stocks at a pressure level that the natural stocks can't stand. I reiterate...
You're peddling the crap now. Common sense.
I reiterate, the rebuilding of natural salmon stocks in this province is essential. Pierre de Bane is committed to that. I think the government is committed to that. It should happen, and there's a bigger world here than simply commercial fishermen. Our subsequent generations are entitled to expect that that natural resource will be there, and they'll decide at the time how they'll use it, and let's hope they use it more sensibly than we have up to now. But let's rebuild those natural stocks.
See this natural resource in a museum, because he's not if producing more fish is not the solution, then only eliminating the industry is.
Producing more fish is fine as long as we're producing them naturally. Let's produce them, let them produce, give them the opportunity to produce.
Well,
habitat degradation is a sad story, and I agree with you on that one, and it's the 1/4 of what you said that I do agree with.
Well, we haven't solved anything this morning. By the way, are you an official of one of the fishing organizations?
No, I'm not an official.
You should be.
Maybe someday, but if there's any organizations left, it'll be a miracle O'Reilly's carrying on.
Before I finish, do you see that? That's O'Reilly in silhouette. You know, that's a backroom boy in the dark. Do you see that? That's Ethel Wennerholm, who was born in Cutknife, Saskatchewan. She turned up at his hotel room door last night and said, you're going to be in Webster tomorrow. I want to do a silhouette. Right?
She said, this is a man who cares about our fish.
That's you. Well, it's the only good reference you got this morning, I'll tell you. I got to get down to this question of the possibility of tainted meat. We've disposed of the last salmon for the moment. Let's dispose of the last carcass after the break. On January 13, I had 2 officials of the Public Service Alliance of Canada who were complaining quite sharply about what they told me was a reduction in inspection, particularly of processed meats in Canada, with the possibility that tainted meat might reach the stores. And one of the particular complaints was that the official stamps would be available to the management of processing plants, with a consequent, implication quite clearly that meant the manager of a processed meat plant or somebody could whip through and put stuff on the shelves which might not be proper because of the lack of the full inspection by the meat inspectors, whatever. With me this morning, I've got Dr. Ross Marra, who is the federal, give me a proper title, Ross.
Regional Director for Veterinary Inspection.
In British Columbia?
That's right.
Does that count both slaughter and processing?
Yes, it does.
Let me put this very simply. What is this?
This is a stamp that is used on a carcass in a slaughter plant. It's also used to stamp cuts from a carcass, sometimes in processing plants.
Well, I think it was clear, but let's confirm it for the sake of the public's mind. Is there any reduction in the application of the stamp to every single chicken, hog, sheep, and beef that goes through a slaughtering plant?
There has been no change. There will not be a change in the process of stamping carcasses which have received antemortem and postmortem inspection in slaughter plants.
So therefore, when the guy who puts this on is one of your inspectors?
Not necessarily, but it is put on under our direct supervision. There is an inspector supervising that process. The carcass is stamped before it leaves the killing floor, and that will not change.
And the cuts are stamped too?
Yes.
Now that is done, now who uses the stamp again? Your inspectors?
It would be a plant employee, but under very rigid control from our own staff.
So there is no change in that whatsoever?
Absolutely not. In fact, I'd like to quote Mr. Whalen in his press release of Friday. There are no changes to the regulations controlling the use of the official government stamps used to identify the quality of meat. The existing procedures are simply being extended to cover weekends and overtime situations.
The existing procedures?
Right.
You're telling me that PSAC was wrong there, for Coates I think it was, when he said that there was a danger or a possibility of these stamps being used, or any stamps being used, to pass meat which might not be proper.
Jack, I can assure you and the viewers that there is absolutely no change to the stamping procedure. The risk of misuse of those stamps has definitely not increased.
All right, now we come to processing, correct?
Right.
Now, you've got a frequency of inspection level which reduces, I presume, the frequency of inspection. So therefore there must be some cut back somewhere in the inspection of processed meats.
Essentially, the cut has been made in the payment of overtime credits for inspectors in processing plants. The so-called foil system has been in effect in this province and in most other provinces for many years. For instance, if you have a small processing plant which perhaps processes 2 items for the export trade largely, it would be destructive almost to the inspector's mind to have him sitting in that plant all the time. He can be used most effectively if he's used on a number of these such plants. The implementation of the foil system means that we have established a standard level of inspection depending upon that plant's complexity, its volume, and its past history of compliance, following the rules.
You're telling me therefore that the inspection of processed meat, now processed meat doesn't get stamps, it gets labels.
Precisely.
It gets labels. Labels like that, for instance. Is that for export?
It could be for export. The plant name, for obvious reasons, has been blacked out, but there are some other samples there that might be
yeah, all kinds of, but these are here are all packages for processed meats.
Yes.
And the inspection is done on a random basis.
The inspection is done by an inspector in the plant, or he may be dropping into that plant for a period each day as the situation demands. He may have to go there because of the receipt of a lot of product from another plant, or there may be an export shipment. He has to gauge his day accordingly.
Now, but in that, is there what about this very firm statement Coates made to me, that the custody of stamps, mind you, I didn't think about paper packages. They are in the command of the management of the plant.
And they have been for a very long time. You have to understand that a particular plant may have 200 or 300 or 400 different labels on packages, and they have to have access to these. They're serving the trade, the export trade, the interprovincial trade, and chain stores primarily.
Well, I get the message from you that what's in the craw of the spokesman for the union is that you've cut back on their overtime.
It's been my feeling and others that that has been a salient feature. The PSAC has made the statement in the past that they would like the clauses on overtime inspection changed in the collective agreement. What in effect they have asked for in the past is discretion on the part of the employee. Now, as you well know, in a slaughter plant, slaughter animals are scheduled for that day's operation.
Killing.
They cannot be held over. it would be inhumane to hold those animals over for another day prior to slaughter. This reason, plus the fact that we are serving a very important industry here, the meat industry, which is an important part of our agri-food sector, and the export market, it's one of the items that has maintained its stability through this recession.
Now, but on the packaging, do you know when a plant is going to package meats?
Certainly.
And do you send the inspector at that time?
Not necessarily. That's an ongoing operation.
Are the materials in processed meat, I know they're checked, the chemists check the contents of them. You do that on a random basis,
Yes.
don't you? But the inspectors in a process plant are not necessarily there all the time unless it's a big, big plant.
That's correct.
And there's been no change in the custody. What's this particular one here?
That's a similar one to the round one that you exhibited.
But that's
just
not for
different
meat.
type. That is for carcasses in a plant that's under the federal provincial plan. You can see the square type of stamp. It's slightly different designation.
A round one is Canada.
Canada approved, and each one has a particular number assigned to that establishment.
Federal provincial plan. Now, there are some plants and slaughterhouses which are provincial, which you inspect on a cost recovery basis.
Yes, we have.
Why do we have two different kind of plants?
The provincial Department of Agriculture had an inspection service up to 1977. They then reached an agreement with the federal Department of Agriculture to provide a cost recovery type of inspection.
So is this stamp as good as that stamp?
The stamp, the inspection that the carcass received is precisely the same. However, the federal stamp means that product from that plant may go on the export market to other countries, or it may be shipped interprovincially.
And
Whereas
the labels are something
provincial-
else again. The labels are in command of the plant.
Yes, under our inspector supervision.
Under your inspector supervision. Yes. Well, therefore, I mean, to add this up in one simple sentence, you're saying that the union campaign is because you're cutting back on overtime. But they say they don't want overtime.
Well, I believe I dealt with that subject in that they want changes made in the overtime, but for obvious reasons, their request that it be at the discretion of the employee is just not practical in this business.
Oh, the employee works as long as he wants, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah, I think I've got it. I'm not quite sure. Calls to Dr. Ross Marra, M-A-R-R-A, short for Connemara.
Right.
More or less.
More or less.
After the break. For the benefit of you. Dr. Marra is the senior federal veterinary director for British Columbia. Okay, it's all very well down here. Is every plant in British Columbia for processed meat subject to either federal or federal provincial inspection?
No, they're under inspection if they make a request to our department to receive inspectional service.
No, you said.
I said no.
Well, hey, why do I balk at that one? I seem to balk at that one. I could set up a meat plant, a processed meat plant, having killed the haggis live on the hoof. I can set that up and send it around BC without being inspected.
No, you cannot. There are certain designated areas in the province where it is illegal to sell meat which has not received ante and postmortem inspection. Those areas are designated under the Province of BC Meat Inspection Act. The designated areas include the lower Vancouver Island, most of the lower mainland, and for some strange reason, the school district of Dawson Creek. Those localities have requested that designation. Other localities have their own public health control of some form or other, and some form generally of sanitary inspection.
And that's all they have?
Right.
Well, I mean, let's face it, that's perfectly good enough in many circumstances, is it not?
I would agree that the business is so competitive that a small operator in an outlying area has to compete with the large packing houses.
But he couldn't ship it out the province, could he?
No, he could not. But he's serving a local trade, and many of them have served it for many years.
Is there any prospect of tainted meat reaching the customers in BC?
I would say there has been no change in inspectional service to the detriment of the product that you receive on your table.
I have in my hand a copy of a document veterinary inspection operations for the, what's that, 1983, a plant in British Columbia, where the vet apparently documented some shocking incidents of sloppiness. You know the document I'm referring to?
Yes, I do, and I'd like to deal with that because I'm quite sure there's been some misinformation resulting from that document. I'd like to deal with a problem in the meat inspection service, first of all. For years, in some plants, our inspectors have assumed the role of a floor supervisor, a middle management in that plant, because they were so concerned about the product that was putting out.
Good for them.
They weren't quite sure about the management's capability to take on quality control in that plant. Now this, under the FOIL system, is changing. It's a gradual change in most cases. All plant managements don't react equally well to assuming that role. I would suggest that this one we're dealing with now has been a bit of a problem in getting management to assume their proper role as quality control people. We are there to monitor their system, not to implement it.
Well, this particular one, your vet, a vet in your department said, spearing of live fowl with a pitchfork, no icing of product 3 hours after, sour poultry, improper chilling, packaging condemned material, filling, and a couple of other shockers. To me, they're shockers. If that was right, did you close the plant?
No, we did not. Each of those items were dealt with at the time. The incident that's quoted in much of the media is urinating on the floor. As a matter of fact, that plant employee was suspended by management after encouragement by our veterinarian in charge for a period of 6 weeks without pay. Likewise, the other incidents were dealt with. If they're disciplined, the plant did the discipline. The chilling of product, these infractions were in fact found while we were operating under the so-called FOIL inspection, which to me is an argument in favor of this level because the particular items have been not only detected, but each one has been dealt with to our satisfaction.
Mind you, if it happens once, the inspector was there, God bless him, instructing an employee to package condemned material.
In that particular case, they were dealing with improperly trimmed gizzards. And the plant supervisor did in fact apparently instruct an employee to process this product. At the time, the veterinarian in charge stopped the kill, stopped the slaughter process, went directly to management, and management immediately corrected the situation.
In other words, these things were corrected?
Certainly.
Presumably, they may have happened before, but presumably they won't happen again. You can't spear a live fowl with a pitchfork, surely.
Most certainly not.
That's awful.
Yes, and certainly the plant has their problems with quality of employees that are on the market to work in their plant.
Well, if a plant appeared in a program, in a report like this, you'd presumably pay special attention to it.
Yes.
Is our chicken inspection satisfactory?
It certainly is.
Poultry inspection?
Poultry inspection. Last year in British Columbia, there were over 30 million birds slaughtered under inspection. One inspector on a line can inspect roughly 1,400 birds per hour, and one plant in particular has 5 stations, so you can see the volume of poultry that's produced. Each bird is viewed by an inspector on the line.
At all times?
Right.
Even under file?
Yes.
In other words, he's there for the killing days?
Yes.
And he's not necessarily there for the rest of the...
Not necessarily for the time when they're allowed to chill and package product.
Okay, I haven't got much time, but we'll take calls to... I'll just take my break now and take calls to Dr. Marra to the end. Good. The allegation was made that there are fly-by-night plants in this industry. How could there be?
I'd like to know, first of all, what a fly-by-night operation is.
Here today and gone tomorrow.
I would be very interested in finding out who they are and where they are. Mr. Coates, in fact, worked in the British Columbia area, and he had a brief period on meat hygiene training. And if he's gathered information from this province or any other province, I'd be most interested in, because we have an enforcement section to deal with such people. In my opinion, though, the meat industry in Canada is on good standing. They are a group with a lot of integrity and are doing a generally good job.
Calls. Go ahead, please.
Hello. A question, 2 quick questions for your guest, please.
Carry on.
Is the inspection stamp on the meat the same as the grade stamp? And my second question, when we receive Christmas gift parcels from Europe, Canada Agriculture instructs the customs to remove any meat products. We don't think this is right.
You mean they remove meat products?
They remove the...
Okay, hold on, 2 questions. Inspection and grading, are these 2 different things?
They are 2 things. Grading deals with quality. The inspection service deals with wholesomeness of the product. The second question, yes, agriculture does remove fresh meat from a lot of countries from people who are traveling because of foot and mouth risk.
So they should do?
Certainly.
So somebody can't send me a chicken from Scotland or a haggis, a live haggis?
Well,
matter of fact, your department stopped the importation of haggis a number of years ago because you said it contained unhealthy products. Did you know that?
I don't think we should have the cruise missile and haggis at the same time, Jack.
Go ahead, please. Go ahead, please.
Good morning.
Morning.
I'm a former plant owner and manager in the Fraser Valley. It was a dairy and an ice cream plant.
Right.
And while it maybe not deal specifically with meat plants, I think the same considerations apply. I guess we could have been termed a fly-by-night operation. While I was a plant of long standing, it had been flipped a number of times to different owners. And in going through the plant on my purchase, I was being shown around the plant, for example, and I was shown the shelf where the product was to be put, that was to be presented to the inspectors. And if we had an inordinately clean run, or what we perceived to be a clean run, that product or a sample of that product would be put on the shelf for them, and no other product was put there. In addition to that, we would be phoned a couple of weeks ahead by the inspector, both the federal and the provincial, and we'd be advised when their sample would be picked up.
How long ago was this?
Oh, 3 years ago, 4 years ago.
What was your product? Ice cream?
Ice cream and dairy fluid.
Okay, do you advise plants when they're going to be inspected?
Oh, yeah, we were phoned ahead, and we were told that we would have...
Hold on, I want to find out if that was improper, if what you're telling me is correct.
No, we have a continuous presence in the plant, and I would suggest that in the case of the dairy products, the inspection was occasional by some other department. We don't deal with it.
Not true.
Yeah, well, okay, that's your story, but you're speaking from blankness. I can't really prove it, but I'm glad you called. Kelowna, go ahead, please.
Yes. Hello.
Yes, ma'am.
I want to know why it is not possible in this country to get good, wholesome, grass-fed beef. Why we have to buy this grade A where the cattle stand in a feedlot for 60 to 90 days till their muscles break down into fat, that marbleizing that we pay so much for.
You're on the point. You're on the topic, but hardly on the point.
Well, there is grass-fed beef available. There probably is by percentage more available in British Columbia than other region because we don't have a lot of grain. So it is available at times. And
as a vet, do you, as an expert in meat and meat products, which is the better, the grass-fed or the grain-fed for human consumption?
I'm not really authority. I'd like to spread the rumor, though, that I heard the other day, though, Jack, that meat eaters do make better lovers.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, hello. The public seems to be worried about tainted meat getting out to the consumer. What I'm trying to find out is if it is something that shouldn't be controlled not only from the federal provincial plants, but also in the municipal plants.
Well, now you explained that there are only certain designated areas covered by the Province of BC Meat Inspection Act.
Right.
Well, what I'm worried about is plants coming from non-federal or provincially inspected plants, and what type of controls these plants have.
Well, I think you covered that, but are you concerned about the fact that the meat inspection, federal, provincial, or federal, does not cover all outlets in BC?
Marginally so. I would say that of the total meat available in British Columbia, well under 10% has not received full inspection.
And when did we last have an outbreak of anything caused by purchased meat?
I really couldn't say.
I can't remember. The only one I can remember was a scandal in Quebec a couple of years back in Montreal. Go ahead, please.
Yes, sir. First of all, it's tainted meat. As soon as I throw it in a frying pan, I can tell it's tainted. But the inspector standing on the line processing 1,400 chickens, he goes for a coffee break, then 280 chickens get by in 20 minutes. What do they do about them? And also, Does the Department of Agriculture or this inspection department have the authority to close down a fly-by-night plant or one that's not abiding by the rules or persistently violating the rules?
Two good questions.
And also, as far as chickens from Scotland is concerned, that's all you're going to get from there.
What's that?
Oh, it's a snap.
Well, in the first place, on in a poultry plant, when an inspector does take a coffee break, he is relieved.
Somebody else rushes in.
Certainly.
They don't miss a chicken.
No, they do not miss a chicken.
What was his second question?
On
have you power to close a plant arbitrarily?
we have the power to remove inspection services from a plant under the Meat Inspection Act. We can detain product in the plant. Yes, we can. If we discovered any practice that is implied in Mr. Coates' statement, we have the authority to stop production in that plant.
When did
I
you last-
suggest to you that these people are in a very competitive market, the export market, the domestic market, whatever it is. They have requested the inspection in the first place. If we in any way shut down production in that plant, they have sold the farm.
Go ahead, please.
Hello, good morning.
Morning.
Yes, I was wondering, what does Dr. Mouse do about when they inject the meat and they do the inspection, but then they find out that the meat has been turned around, sent to the shipper, and they cut the meat in the restaurants and that, and they still find needles in it. What do they do about problems like this?
We take a few consumer complaints when they're directed in our direction and investigate them case by case.
Do you get many?
Very, very few.
She was talking about a needle broken off.
Yeah, a needle broken off right inside the meat itself. It's gone through the restaurant. The cooks haven't noticed it. The meat has been inspected and everything else, but then the person that's eating the meat finds it.
Oh, well, they've got a fancy lawsuit, and they carefully cut the lip and go into trauma and walk away with $150,000. It's almost as good as getting the 649 lottery. But be careful to preserve the needle and have witnesses see it coming out, sticking through your cheek. Okay?
Okay, thanks.
Retailers are very interested in learning about that sort of thing, and in our experience, they deal with a case like
people
that.
made
Sure.
fortune on mice and in soft drink bottles.
Yeah.
Dr. Marra, thanks very much. It's the other side of the story from Dr. Marra. And I'll be back after the break. Going to have a detailed look at this BC Place problem and the possibility that it will close right down, courtesy Vancouver City Council. Oh, they should be proud of that one if they pull it off. My goodness gracious me. And we're going to do our A walkabout, just like the Queen, at BCIT on its 20th birthday. It's quite good fun. 9 a.m. precisely. When do we catch the last salmon in BC? And check at midnight.